But yeah, so why though? I mean, if we look at the general world of media, if we look at TV, we look at films, we look at adverts even, there has become less of a, you're not just allowed to put women in skimpy bikinis all the time. I'm not saying it never happens, but, you know, we are past the days of the glamorous assistant in her underwear draped over the car or whatever and stuff like that. Why do we think it persists in gaming so much? Why in gaming is it still almost impossible to have a female character in a fight scene wearing something that actually covers her navel or gives any genuine armour protection in the case of a sword fight? Because I really worry. I wouldn't want to do it. Anyway, what do you think, Matt? What's the problem? What's holding us back?
Well, it struck me that in all these other forms of media, you need to actually get a woman to do the things that you want her to do. In a video game, you just need to animate it. You've got to have a man someone willing to animate it. I'm not saying it's just men, because like if it's your career and you want to be a character artist and you're a woman and your director says, no, we want bigger boobs, and you go, oh, actually, I don't think that's very good, and you stand up, then you're going to be called difficult, and you're going to be called a pain in the arse to work with, and you're going to get bad references. So women, as always are in these environments, they are forced to do things that they would not choose to do because of the powerful people above them. So yeah, that's part of my impression as to why it still happens so much.
Alex, what do you think?
Well, I thought in my notes, the only notes I've got for this question, because it was quite a hard one, was that it's not real, it's just virtual, which is perhaps the excuse that some people would hide behind, because it's, like Matt says, it's not something that real people have to do or put themselves in those situations. Because it's created, it's therefore more likely to be the way that it is, perhaps because of the people that are creating it. And that's all I've got, because it's quite a difficult question, really.
No, it's not an easy one to ask. And I think it's more of a political question in some ways. But Jem, what were you thinking?
I think it's a political one. I think it's to do with who is running the industry. I think that, you know, there's a lot of men running the industry at the moment, and I think there's still this idea that the audience is primarily male, so they are still designing everything for the male gaze. I also think that if you're a female gamer who's kind of grown up in the games world, like I am, there is an element of conditioning. So you expect your female characters to look sexy. You kind of, you know, often want to look cool and sexy in your armor. And to be brutally honest, sensible armor doesn't normally look very sexy. You know, it's quite functional. And so I think, you know, there's a thing about, you know, who do I want to look at? Who do I want to see when I'm running along? What kind of view do I want from behind, you know, and all of those things. And I think the problem is that we are a conditioned society, and then we go in, and in our idealistic worlds, we want to have idealistic figures and idealistic outfits. And I think there is a big problem that as a result, perhaps the kickback hasn't been big enough. Perhaps we don't argue the case enough to shift the thing. But I do think it is moving, actually. I do think it's moving. I think there are sensible armors. I think Mass Effect is a good example of that. I think Dragon Age Inquisition, which I know is about 100 years old, but I am playing right now. And that is, you know, that has decent armors. It also has ridiculous armors that are like body paint, but it does have sensible armors in. So I think there is a movement towards it. But then when you take games like Fortnite or Overwatch, you know, which are massively popular, then I think then it all goes out the window again, and you're just sort of, you know, head in hands. You know, I mean, Fortnite is a really good example, because with Fortnite you get you're automatically assigned a a gender, which is great. So you don't choose it, but they're both hypersexualized. They're both very idealized physiques and clothing.
Well, we have a user comment. We have a user comment here from Daniel Erickson, whoever he is. But it's saying that, is this possibly because games have been outside the mainstream spotlight until now? Is it because gaming hasn't received the sort of focal attention that movies and TV and various other media have, that has put that pressure on them to remove the hypersexualization? And I slightly agree with that, but I also slightly... I don't know how skewed my perspective is. It's like gaming has always been a huge part of my life. So
we've been in that bubble, haven't we?
Now in the spotlight is a sort of weird one. I, in fact, saw something... that was one. It was on Reddit, and it was talking about girl gamers, and it was one of these horrible threads where somebody had said something horribly abusive. But what was interesting about it is it was somebody complaining about a girl gamer and how they're all awful. And he said, when it's not fashionable anymore, they'll all piss off then. And it was like, what? So gaming's fashionable at the moment? Is it? I realised that wasn't the important part of the thread, but that was the bit that really struck me. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
That's a very odd thing to say.
I don't know, Jem, if you want to mention the "what about men" comment you got, or we can just talk about it more generally.
Or is, you know,
you don't want to name names. This.
I mean, no. I think that is an issue, isn't it? I mean, that the male characters are also very idealized, aren't they? I mean, you know, and increasingly so, these very extremely muscular men with tiny torsos and enormous shoulders, and I think, you know, there's definitely is some hypersexualization going on in general, and it seems, I think the shame is that as gaming, I'm with you, Caroline. I think gaming isn't behind the scenes. I think it is actually very mainstream in a way that we don't really appreciate it. You know, that a massive amount of people are gaming. So, you know, I think that's not a good enough excuse. But I think the shame is that as we've recognised that female characters can lift a gun too, we've just, rather than desexualize them, we've started to sexualize the men. And I just think, you know, that's just really problematic for me, this whole thing.
I think a key issue with the what about men arguments, which made me want to smash my head into the table counter when I read it, is the false equivalency. So someone said, we're going to talk about hypersexualization of women in gaming, and someone says, oh, what about men? And I go, okay. Then we say, yeah, there are some sexualized men, and you point that someone's just pointed out Gear of War, in which case all the men, and I think the women are big and butch as well. But the problem when you look at men, like say with Thor in the Marvel universe or Kratos, their sexualization is matched with their power. Mm. You have big muscles, which means you're powerful. If you're a woman who looks like quiet, then that isn't meant to be a sign of power. It's just meant to be a sign of sexiness. It diminishes them rather than builds them up. So that's part of the false equivalency that comes with any "what about men" argument.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I'm not going to use that segue right now, because I was going to use that segue in a bit, but I think that's the really key point, is like, what is the byproduct of that sexualization? And that while, you know, Henry Cavill in The Witcher, I mean, I could talk about that for hours. That is a handsome man, but you know, but does it put him at risk? Does it put other men at risk? The fact that the objectifying way that I may happen to look at Henry Cavill, probably not.
I was going to jump in and mention the issue about body image and just the ideal body. It's not a new thing. It's been going on for centuries, right the way back to like ancient Greek times. When you think about Grecian statues, you always see like really strong, athletic men, and like, you know, just really thin, beautiful women. And I think, you know, it's not a new thing. So we've got centuries and centuries of this kind of ingrained into our heads that that's the ideal body. and that's how it's going to be. So I think that is kind of reflected in a lot of our media, even now still.
Yeah.
And I did put in my notes just fat phobia. I don't know if that's a thing that we should be talking about, but again, that might be a separate issue. I don't know. But it's worth raising the point.
You're allowed to talk about anything you like, Alex.
It's worth raising the point because
got a camera on you, it's fine.
You know, like how often can anyone name
forever.
a video game protagonist that's actually fat?
Yeah.
You know.
No, and I was thinking about this when I was thinking about what are the good examples that we've seen that we've done right. And actually that was why I started looking for Stardew Valley, because like one of the characters, so my Discord icon is Pam from Stardew Valley, who is an alcoholic old woman who's a little bit larger and drives the local bus. But she's not horrific. She's not anything. She's just a normal person character. But I just wanted to, before we move back to that, is talk about the political side, which is, of course, the game industry itself. So, like Lisa's raised here, wondering if designers caught on to the fact that young people are more woke and